Uh, and so we get to talk about pruning today. So, here you go. Tree pruning, because we've seen throughout the semester, we've seen a lot of trees that have been butchered. They have not been pruned properly. And so pruning and the early training of the tree is going to be very, very important so that the tree can have a stable canopy, so the tree can have strong branches, and so that the tree can live for as long as it needs to or as long as it could. And so here we have our rock fig. I've shown these photographs before. And what initially caught my eye with this tree was that it was pruned properly. Somebody had taken a lot of time and put a little bit of money into making sure that the tree received the natural pruning or routine pruning. So we can see a very nice uniform division of the different branches. And although when you compare this photograph, there's a branch that was removed here that we can see the wound later on over here. The tree still looks nice. I just needed to lift it a little bit more. And so when you have a few of those trees that were having recently pruned, as in this case, and it's also the winter, you can see and highlight the stems as well. Later on, when it leaves out, it looks uniform and it looks good. So this is the example. And later on, we have the cycle continue on when the tree is constantly being pruned. So it is very important for trees to begin the pruning cycle when they're young, and that is going to be the training to make sure that those branches are strong. But also, as they become older, it is also important for them to continue with the pruning cycle. Otherwise, the trees are going to lose their form and shape, and then it's going to cost a lot more to try to repair them. In the same manner, when a tree has gone through a routine pruning cycle for its entire life, you should not just take it away from that cycle and from one year to the other or cold turkey because there's going to be other problems that may be associated because the tree wants to be trimmed or now the branches are going to come out from different areas and it's just may become a problem later on. So whatever cycle you started, make sure that it is continue with that tree. And here we have a grove of trees. This is not too far from campus, is Atlantic and PCH. We have a nice grove and we were a witness as they were being pruned. And this is probably not the best way of pruning them. So they are climbing them, and that's going to be the case. Most of the pruning will be done by an arborist or a person that is experienced with pruning trees. Not necessarily do every single person that is pruning trees as an arborist, but you will see many people pruning trees, whether they be arborists or not. They may climb with ropes and saddle, or they would use a lift or a cherry picker to get them to that height. Here's where we have a serious pruning problem. On the left, we have a tree that has a relatively natural form. And on the right, we have a tree that has been made into a topiary. Is this the right way to treat a tree? The answer is no. If they are put in the parkway for a reason, to beautify for the environment, for property value and all of that, then let the tree do its job and do not make it into a topiary. If this is a tree that you don't want, for whatever reason, you don't want it in front of your parkway, keep in mind that the parkway belongs to the city, and it's probably best to get rid of the tree than to keep going or putting it through this terrible abuse of just being a topiary. Exactly the same tree in two different cares. And we've seen the boxes. Is this the rightful shape of the tree? The answer is no. Or we've seen the mushroom, or we've seen the shaggy on top as well, and or the baskets. In this People call it pruning. It is not. It's topiary, but trees should not be made into this. Or we have the serious topping. So topping is going to be a word that you may hear a lot. And that is when a tree has been allowed to grow, probably unchecked. And then somebody decides to bring it down in size because it may have been a little bit too big for its area. I don't want it that big. And so they go and they cut the tree into stubs without leaving any other growth area. And so, yes, it is going to be a natural response of the tree because they have taken all the leaves, all of the branches, all of those important photosynthetic areas have been taken away, and the tree is going to respond by sending a lot of branches growing from the same spot. A second. In terms, the tree is going to develop what is known as witch's broom. Sorry about that. And so in this case, they took the witch's broom, running dry on coffee, and they made them into balls. And obviously, that's not something nice, and it looks nothing natural. So this is a Chinese elm for your reference, made into two poodles or two balls. Uh, Here we have the different view of the same tree where there's nothing natural about it. And everywhere you will see trees being made into some kind of shape and form. And I mentioned before, it is unfortunate that many people will see this and they might like it and they may assume that this is the right way of pruning the plant. And so if you see something like this scattered throughout a street or a neighborhood, it's probably the same person pruning them. And they prune one tree. The neighbor side is like, I like it, can you do mine? And then it keeps spreading to the other neighbors until they massacre and they deform all of the trees in that neighborhood. Uh, and here's a orchid tree also being made into some kind of ball. We have the example here, our Brazilian pepper, and I mentioned before, it can be quite ugly. So hopefully we'll get to see this individual. It is located at the other campus, the LAC campus. And so yes, rifle and early removal of some of those branches is going to be crucial. You want to remove them early on so that you don't have or create large wounds. The bigger the wound, the longer that the time that is going to take for that wound to heal. And so when you cut them when they're very young, it will heal very, very quickly. This is topping. These are sycamores. And somebody went way too far down. And so these were decent trees back in the days, and now they are no longer there. So when you just take a tree and cut just two stubs, that is referred to as topping. And it happens all the time. In most cases, it will be the tree begins to block the sign of a business or the view of the business, and the business owner does not want that to happen. And so the tree gets topped and or severely damaged. Once a tree has been topped like this, it is already in a road or placed in a road for failure because it's just going to have a few branches here and there. You have taken a lot of the reserve energies that was stored in the stem. You have taken away the photosynthetic green leaves. And so you're just leaving a bunch of stems and their roots. And after this, every single branch that is developed is going to have a really bad attachment and or it's going to fail. Can you work on this tree and make it safe once again? The answer is yes, but it'll be several years, maybe 10 years of every single year going there, selecting branches and pruning it and shaping it to bring it back to a healthy state. And obviously most people will not want to do that, especially since they just paid to have this tree topped. And here's a few more. So the middle, the one on the left, it's an American sweet gum just cut in half. That is not good. And here's an ash tree. And this too big for the area. You should have removed the tree back in the days instead of just cutting it just a few feet from the ground. Yes, the tree will try to survive. So at some point, it's sent out a few branches and or a few buds that were there that grew into a branch. Those were also topped later on, and it is stressful, and it is going to decline in health, and over time it may take 7, 5, 6, 7, 8 years. The tree will succumb and the tree will die, and here's all that they left. I'm happy to say that these trees are now dead. They're gone, lucky for them, and they got replaced by rose later on. Or here's American sweet gum. Uh, mm, Somebody cut them in half, and now they're just balls. No branches, just branch shoots coming out of the stem. And so here is a mulberry tree, and this would be the example of those witch's broom. So witch's broom, because I guess I look like a witch. And so we know that the tip of the branch, which is known as the apical bud, is going to have a dominance, and it's going to keep the other branches at bay from growing. So it does not want to have any competition. So a consequence of me topping this tree and cutting that apical dominance is that the branches are now going to be growing without any control, without any stopping. And so they're all going to try to compete for the dominance, and they're all going to grow the same speed and the same girth, and they're just going to become this massive of tiny twigs and branches. And so all of these branches that you see here are going to eventually cause the tree to fail because they have very poor attachment. It's just going to be a big mass of ugly branches. And because they also have a poor attachment, if the Santa Ana winds go through here or fly through here, many of those branches will break, opening up more wounds and causing more problems to the tree. So here's the tree, just branches growing from every single bud that was dormant, out of control, just growing it. And it is the response of the tree. It is trying to put as much of the leaf surface as it can so that it's going to be able to rebuild the reserves that it lost and be able to survive. So it is a survival mechanism. We cannot blame the tree. The healing of the wounds is also going to be very, very important. It's very important that you understand that when a branch gets cut properly, there is going to be a natural cycle of healing. And we talked about the branch color ridge. So that healing tissue, that is part of the stem. So when you cut a branch, it's very important that that ridge gets left intact, because as time goes by, there are cells that will continue to multiply and divide, and they will gradually and slowly close the wound. And it is very important for that wound to be closed and sealed. And so when you are going to be cutting a big branch, it is very, very important that you take several steps. The last thing that you want is for you to start to saw off this branch, and then the weight of the branch is going to break it. And when it breaks, it's going to take with it the bark, or it's going to have the ripping of the bark. The ripping of the bark is never going to heal. And so it is very important that several steps are taken. So step number one, the underside cut. So this is the very first cut. So on the underside of the leaf, you are going to cut or saw off about halfway. This is going to be the breaking point. So if this branch decides to drop because of the weight, it is not going to rip the bark from the stem and preventing a much more worse wound that from happening. So cut it halfway. And then a couple of inches towards the stem, or sorry, outside the stem, you're going to begin to saw or cut the branch from the top. As the weight of the branch becomes more and as you begin to cut, then the branch will naturally break off here. And because you already cut it from the below, it's just going to snap and just the branch is going to fall. So this is what's going to prevent the ripping of the bark. And then the final cut, we do not want to leave any kind of stuff because that's going to provide an area for pathogens to go in, is for you to make the final cut, removing the stump outside the branch collar ridge. So this wrinkle area, you got to make sure that that remains intact. So do not cut it, never cut it flush to the stem because now you are injuring the stem and that is not going to heal. So 3 steps, takes a little bit of time, but if the branch is big or heavy, it is highly recommended that you carry out the removal of large branches to avoid ripping the bark. And so with time, here is the beginning of the healing. So we have the branch collar ridge that is beginning to heal. You have the branch, and here is the branch collar ridge already closing at least certain percentage of this American sweet gum. And as time goes by, here is one that has already healed or completely cut it, closed itself. So now this area or the stem is now protected. And with time, that's also going to kind of get disappear, so you may not see it. Uh, Cuts like this, where they have topped the tree, and there is no branch collar ridge, there is no way for the tree to heal itself. So once again, here is another Chinese elm that has been seriously topped and seriously mispruned. Here is another one. Again, it is very common. Different Chinese elm that has suffered the same thing, just a few leaves here and there. And here's another one where they left a few more branches, but just some lion's tail, what we like to refer to lion's tail, when you have just a couple of tiny sprigs of leaves and branches at the tip. Looks like the tail of a lion. It's called lion tailing. And so they left a few branches and it's getting better. Or here's where they have at least lift some of the branches. But what I want you to notice is that you have the center stem that is going to be thick, and then it's going to begin to be reduced by the branches. So the lateral branches will be a little bit less, have less girth. And from there, the other branches will have less girth and less girth and less girth until you get to the tips. So is this a good pruning? It's better than the first ones, but it still needs a lot more work. It's still lion's tailing. They just left a few more of the lateral branch, so a few more in the canopy. Here is what will happen later on. So just a bunch of branches coming from those lion's tail. This would be more of what we would like to see. So here's the example of a tree that is properly pruned. So you have, beginning from the bottom, you have the stem, and then as you go and or jump onto any of those branches towards the tip, you will see a gradual decline in girth all the way from this branch to this smaller one, and then this one, and eventually towards the tip. And so by simply removing some of the smaller branches and not cutting into the bigger branches, then you avoid the topping. So this would be considered a very good pruning where you still have a very nice canopy. You have the different girth declining or escalating down of the girth of the branches to make the tree look really, really nice. And so here's a Chinese elm in a residential area, or several of them, that have been trained correctly, and they have a very nice silhouette and a very nice branching pattern. Or here is another Chinese elm. Once again, you can see a very nice transition between the girth of the branches leading towards the tips, where you're going to find those leaves and not just lying tailing like we've seen before. Here are, as another one, this one being made into or being allowed to become a big tree as it should. And you see exactly the same thing. So you can reduce the canopy. You can remove some of the, selectively remove some of the branches but just avoid that topping of those trees, which is not good. Really bad pruning on Canary Island pine. I mentioned before, with very few pine or the one pine that can tolerate being pruned to heavy or woody areas. Most other pines will probably die the moment that you don't have any leaves. But this one, it's tolerant and forgiving. And so they have literally taken every branch and have cut it in half. People think that's normal. People think that is the way to prune them, but obviously that is not. And they also taken away the central leader, so they topped the main stem. Not good, bad, but it's going to survive. But once again, the shape, the form, and everything has already been destroyed. Here's another one, and this one they just selected a few branches, left them there, cut the top, and obviously this does not even look like a tree. I think this one is now dead, or hopefully it's dead. Here's one where they have, at some point, they probably topped it. So you can follow the main stem leading up, and somewhere here, something happened to the main stem. And as mentioned before, as a result, the dominance is going to be gone. So then you have three other branches, some of them a little bit thicker, some of them a little bit thinner, that probably competed for the dominance. And I guess in this case, three were allowed to remain. Ideally, it should have been one, but I guess they chose to keep three. Is that good? Well, if the angle is going to be wide enough, it could be good for several years. If the angle or the crotch is very narrow, then obviously it's going to have included bark and cause problem later on. So, but at least to some degree, it is not nowhere near as bad as the left. So you still have a nice transition between the girth of the branches from the stem leading towards the tip. However, that central leader gone is a problem with the form and the shape. Ideally, conifers have that natural pyramidal shape. So here are some spruces and other conifers that will not grow here, but you can see that's in nature. So they don't really require a lot of care, a lot of pruning. People tend to over prune them, and that's a problem. So here's just sample natural growth habit. And so it is okay to lift them. So if you need to have access to the underside, you can lift the canopy, or sometimes referred to as lifting the skirt of the tree. So those bottom branches, just to allow that uh, access, but make sure that you still keep the natural pyramidal shape for them. Here is our incense cedar, California native tree. So there's the example of a tree that has the branches all the way to the bottom, or at least very close to the bottom. And here is a different instance cedar. This one more in the parkway, so they need the access. So it has been allowed to lift the canopy and a little bit more. But the shape of the tree is still there. It has not been topped, and it does not need any more pruning than just lifting those lower branches to allow for the access underneath it, or the clearance. So perfect example. And so if something were to happen to that central leader that is going to now change the tree shape, it is very important that the person or you, whomever, begins and selects a brand new leader. So here's just examples where uh, you can cut back some of those lower or other competing branches just to make sure that the central one, whichever is selected, becomes the leader and is the highest point. Or you can train one, you can arch it up or help it grow up. And by being the topmost bud, that becomes a dominant that then keeps the other ones at bay. So you can work with the tree if the central leader has been severed off or has been damaged, and you can reinitiate another one to make the tree grow into a normal shape again. Here are Italian cypresses as a street tree here in Long Beach, probably very old because you see some of the more lateral or wider branching on them. They just lift the canopy. They haven't been touched much, which they don't need to. And here's a different view of those individuals. Here's that Italian stone pine or umbrella pine. Get very little pruning, just let it grow, and eventually, as it gets older, it's going to acquire this natural form and shape. Just lift a few of the branches to give you access, and that's what they have done here. You can see some of the wounds that are healing. So very little pruning with that Italian stone pine. And here's a different one here in Long Beach. Same thing with the Aleppo pine. This was probably one of the best Aleppo pines in Long Beach. Not one of the best, it was the best, and now it's gone. And then we have some of the cedars. And conifers require very little care. So here they selected a couple of very nice branches. And some of them are lower, so they like kept the lower branches. And they kept that one single leader somewhere in the middle. And you have a couple of other branches that makes this tree look very, very nice. So just proper selection and very little pruning. Uh, and then here's another cedar. This one's, I think it's by Park Estates, with that central leader and evenly spread branches. And then we have a few other junipers, conifers. So here's junipers. We may get to see this one later. From this angle, it looks very, very nice. It looks uniform. It looks green. But looking at from the other side, it's a very different story. So you can see that the leaves or the green portion is only going to be towards the tip because that is what's getting the sunlight. And so they had to cut back the tree because it was probably blocking this driveway. And then you see that after many years, only a few tips that probably had some green are now resprouting, but all of the other woody areas have are still naked. And so it is the common thing with the conifers that they do not have many lateral buds dormant. And so that is why they cannot resprout from older wood. And they come from a different era. It is a very different tree. And so they just do not have that emergency. Maybe they didn't need it back in the days when there were no humans pruning them or misshaping them. But that's what happens here. So by cutting maybe a few of the branches here, they have opened it up. Now from one side, it looks very nice, and the other side looks very bad. So that's a cypress. And here's topping, as they are saying, as it is said. So these are mulberry trees. And this is what normally happens. The tree gets way too big. And so people just want to control it. And they begin it into a cycle of topping it. This is obviously not good. And here's eucalyptus, topping it really, really bad. And we also need to make sure that we differentiate from topping a tree to pollarding a tree. Because unfortunately, people will see this and they say, oh, I just want my tree to be pollarded, and that is why we're doing this. The answer is no, you are topping the tree. This is not pollarding, this is topping. This is going to be pollarding the tree. And what is the difference? The difference is that when you take a tree and you allow it to grow big and massive, and all of a sudden you go and you cut the branches all the way to stops, that is going to be topping. Yes, you're going to have a response from the tree creating branches, which you see here, but that's all that you're going to get. And so when you are actually going to be pollarding a tree, this has to be done from the very early stages. From the design stage, you need to say, I need a pollarded tree right here. And so what happens then is that a tree is going to be planted for that purpose. And then when the tree gets to a certain height, that's going to be the height that you want the tree to be. Then you are going to initiate a very, very rigorous pruning cycle. So from maybe 2, 3, 4 years after planting, you are going to begin the first pruning. you are going to decapitate the tree and you will prune it every single year because the tree has started to be pruned very, very young. It's going to develop this grotesque type growth. And so these are year after year of trees kind of keep branching and being pruned every single year to bring it back to this grotesque growth that will cause what is known as pollarding. And so what you see here is the response of the tree because you are taking away the branches, you're taking away the leaves. The tree will naturally create this grotesque growth where it's going to store energy, where it's going to store resources, it's going to store water and a bunch of other things. And so it's not going to go into that shock that is going to kill it. The tree has already started to protect itself. And so you don't see this grotesque growth or these big balls on a tree that has been topped because it has not started on that cycle when it was very young. And so this cycle of pruning must continue for the rest of the life of the tree. You cannot start a tree and say, oh, we're going to pollard it. Yes, it's going to look very nice. And all of a sudden, oh, I don't want to pollard anymore. I'm going to let it go. And now it's going to become a big tree. That is not good. So if the tree was called to be pollarded from the planting day, then the pollarding will begin a couple of years from there. And that cycle of pruning is going to have to occur every single year. And so here's some of the buds. You see some of the younger branches that have been cut. So there are going to be dormant buds throughout this callus. That would be the word, callusing these balls. And that's where the new branches will come out the next year or the following year. So that is pollarding in the cycle, and it was called for in the beginning, and the tree knew that it was going to be pollarded the moment that it got planted, not something that occurs after the matter. So there's just that grotesque year after years of growing branches, cutting branches, growing branches, cutting branches, growing branches, cutting branches. That's going to be the result. This is not good. So American sweet gum, just one branch was left because it was growing towards the electrical line. And that's something that you need to be very careful. The power lines, especially if you're going to be using pole cutters or things that are made out of metals. Ideally, if a tree needs to be removed or move away from the electrical lines, it is best to call the electrical company because they do have their own trucks and their own employees that would go there and free up or prune back the tree away from the electrical lines. Has there been incidents where humans have accidentally hooked to the line and tried to cut it and gotten electrocuted? The answer is yes. So be very careful. Keep all metal tools away from the electrical lines. So that's what happened here. They pruned whatever they could, whatever was not touching the line, and they just left a little sprig there because of whatever safety reasons. Or you don't want to cut that branch and have the branch rip the cable because that's not going to be good and you're not going to be the popular in the neighborhood. So here's a different view of that American sweet gum being horribly topped and just a spray. Here's the weeping form. So these are the peppermint willows in the front yard. Again, very little pruning, just maybe lift the canopy a little just so that you can have some clearance. Here's some of the older ones that I've seen. These are in Culver City. And so again, very nice stem, no root damage there, and just kind of been allowed to grow. This one is a jacaranda in Park Estates, and I guess they like to keep that branch. So they left a branch that kind of snakes through the yard, and I guess maybe the children can climb it, and that was the reason why it was left. Other than that, it should have been removed many years ago. And you have the incidents where the suckers from the trees are made into hedges. People like to hedge everything. They like to make boxes and balls, and even trees are not exempt from that. So here is an olive tree. And olive trees naturally have a natural tendency to send suckers from the ground. The suckers will shade the ground, they'll shade the stem, they'll help out with also shading the soil to make it nice and cool. And in time, they can create another plant or a grove or expand the tree. And obviously, people don't want to remove them from the base because that is an annual cycle. So they then tend to shape it into some kind of weird round ball thing, majiggy, and that's what we have here. So suckers, and if they're allowed to become trees, they could be problematic. But should you make it into a hedge or a topiary, not the best thing. Here's very nice examples. Here is a oak tree, and you see a very nice transition between the stem and the lateral branches and all the way to the tips, and a very nice round canopy. Here is hack tree, but during the winter when it loses the leaves, you can definitely appreciate a very good pruning cycle that this tree has gone to. Lift high enough where it's not going to be hit by any kind of cars or trucks or anything else. And a beautiful transition from branches, the girth of the branches from where they fan out from the trunk to the tips where they are very, very thin. So here's a perfect one. And white birch, we'll see this one later. During the winter, is going to drop the leaf and you have the white stem. Again, no pruning is necessary for this tree. Naturally, it'll shape itself. And any kind of pruning will have a very negative impact on it. And I've seen a couple of those. And now if we move to palms, the tip of the palm is the most important thing. And so whenever I see something like this, luckily they're no longer there, where they cut the tip of the palm, those palms are dead. There is no such thing as branching in palms. So those are dead, they're gone now. So we don't have to worry about them. So I like to say they cut a little bit too far down and now they're dead. So there's a different view of those palms. And or something like this, where they just wanted to clear the electrical lines. And so they cut the leaves on a queen palm on all of them in half. Obviously, that's does not look nice. Or they cut the leaves from the Mexican fan palm only on one side, the side that would be coming in contact with the electrical lines. This is not good pruning. Obviously, this is only temporarily. New leaves will come out, but in the process, you have made these palms look really ugly. Or I hate to say that somebody got paid for this pruning job, which they should have not. I have no problem with removing trees. If the tree is going to be a problem, it's best probably to remove it and plant something better, something more appropriate than to get it through this cycle of abuse and deformation and problematic. So here's all the palms in this housing area pruned by the same person. And also with your Canary Island date palm. We know that it is customary to make them into pineapples. We know that it's important to remove the old leaves because they'll fall. But it is very important that when they're going to be cutting the leaves, that they do not cut too deep into the stem, uh, because now the stem is injured, which is a big problem. As long as it's the leaves and you have the base of the leaves, then those will fall off naturally from the stem and there's no injury. However, when we see something like this, where the stem has been injured, that is now the site for a fungus infection. And it is that fungus infection that will cause the problem with crown failure of Canary Island date palm. And that will, what was going to happen is that this entire crown right about here, which is going to be very, very heavy, it's just going to fall on top of a car, on top of a person, on top of a house, and it's going to do a lot of damage because that is a really big, big ball of palm leaves. And so if the pruning is to be done, then make sure that it's only done with a hands out right now because of the paint rot, and that the damage does not go deep enough where the stem of the palm is going to be injured. Just here's some Mexican fan palms that I shown before and park in North Long Beach. And here's a Mexican fan palm that is dead. And so why we'll go through the problem of topping the palm or cutting the palm, and you are just going to allow the stem to remain upright as it rots and as it eventually is going to have to come down or fall probably. And so this is just waiting for a big problem to occur. It's just time before this palm literally falls and to the side. Very nicely kept king palms by uh, Naples Island. There's a different view of those. And also very nicely kept palms for our Mediterranean fan palm. And so we mentioned before that when you have a clumping palm, it is possible for you to control the height. A single stem palm, you cannot control the height. Once it gets too big, chop it, get rid of it, and get something smaller or start all over again. However, when you are dealing with a naturally clumping palm, you can do a selection of different stems wherever you want them, and you can keep those. And new ones will come from the bottom. And if the palm happens to be getting too tall for whatever reason, then you can remove that entire stem to the base. Now you have brought it down in size. And so I can bring this entire palm down in size to about here by removing these three other palms if I wanted to, or the taller palms if I wanted to. But this is probably one of the best Mediterranean fan palms that I've seen out there, that somebody has done a very good job in selecting the branches that are going to be in the right area, and done a very good job in just pruning and keeping those stems nice and clean. Here are Chinese fan palms. We may get to see these ones later on, or we may not. And here's where they have pruned them. So here's how they would look, and here's how they have pruned them now. And they have also pruned some of the queen palms. What is very important with the palms is that if possible, you should draw a line from across or parallel to the ground on the crown of the palm. And so any branches or any leaves that are above that line should be kept. And so here with the queen palm, you can draw, they probably took away too many leaves, if you ask me. It is not good for the palm to just have maybe 3, 4 leaves that are just facing straight up. Keep some that are going to be coming here and here and here until they're all parallel. Anything that grows or that are hanging below that parallel line, yes, you can remove that one or those ones. But have these palms been over pruned? The answer is yes. They have taken much too many leaves, or much more, a few more leaves than they really needed to. So make sure do not just leave 1 or 2 leaves at the very tip of the palm, because that's not good. They need more leaves than that. Here's just stopping, and you have a parking lot, you have a cement area, you have a very hot sun. You put trees for shade, but you don't allow the trees to develop into a nice tree for providing shade. And so why would you even bother with putting some of these trees in? So now they're just suffering and looking really ugly. And every single tree has been treated like that. And probably the person did not know how to prune them, or they just don't want them anymore. Here's a sycamore. This one is Naples Island. Again, probably very big for its area. So they've done a decent job of pruning it. But you can see where they have done serious cuts. So I would say this would be the extreme where they have done some decent work in making sure that the tree doesn't get too out of control, because if it does, it's going to be gone. It's way too big for that tiny area. It's probably way too big for the location where it was planted. But it looks good. Has it cost a lot of money? I'm sure it has, because this is not an easy place to get to. But sycamore looks decent. Here is macadamia nuts. They're without being pruned. And then here is one of the best weeping bottle brush. This one's in the west side of town. No need for pruning. Just lift the canopy, lift some of the lower branches to allow access, and the rest is going to be taken care of. And kind of towards the end, this is a weeping willow. Probably the best weeping willow in Long Beach. Whether it's still there or not, I don't know. This has been several years since I took this photograph, but very, very bad tree for Long Beach. This one looking good because it has the entire corner to itself. And even then, you have already breaking some of the cement and roots that are already going out and up and about. Uh, so beautiful tree. I like weeping willows, but it's not an appropriate tree for Long Beach or any of the small areas, small homes, small properties around Long Beach. And so with that, are there any questions? Us. So, all right. So I will post it because I know I'll start recording.